قد أفلح المؤمنون.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين وسيد النبيين وخير الخلائق أجمعين، أبو القاسم محمد المصطفى وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم وسهل مخرجهم وأهلك أعداءهم من الأولين والآخرين. يا الله، ما في غيرك يا كريم يا أرحم الراحمين. A popular report often cited by not only the opponents of the Shia but also the proponents of Tahrif claims that the Qur'an was originally revealed with 17,000 verses, and since we only have around 6,000 verses left, it means that the Qur'an has suffered a distortion of nearly 11,000 verses. This hadith can be read from Kitab al-Kafi. Ali bin al-Hakam has narrated from Hisham bin Salim from Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, who said, the Qur'an that came to Jibreel alayhi salam brought to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alih had 17,000 verses. In light of this hadith, we will refute this silly claim and address this weak proof that people cite in favor of Tahrif. To start, the chain quoted here is not the full one, as there's ta'liq or summarizing in the chain. In the hadith just before it, hadith number 27, we find the full chain. Muhammad bin Yahya from Ahmad bin Muhammad, from Ali bin al-Hakam, from Hisham bin Salim, from Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. At first glance, this chain seems authentic since all the narrators are well known here, except that it is falsely assumed that here Ahmad bin Muhammad is Ibn Isa, who is a well-known, reliable narrator. However, upon further investigation, we can prove it's a different narrator with the same name, that being Ahmad bin Muhammad bin Sayyar, also known as As-Sayyari. Firstly, by referring back to the Fahrist of At-Tusi, page 66, we read that he says that Muhammad bin Yahya al-Attar used to narrate from Ahmad bin Muhammad ibn Sayyar that he had a book titled Kitab al-Qira'at. Shaykh al-Najashi also mentioned this in his Rijal al-Najashi, pages 429 to 430, as we can read. Both scholars considered him weak in hadith and associated him with the ghulat, and Ibn al-Ghadairi likewise did so in his Kitab al-Du'afa, calling him weak, careless, ghali, and deviated. Al-Najashi further mentions that Ibn al-Walid al-Qummi, rahimahullah, considered him among the narrators that he weakened, and Shaykh Saduq, rahimahullah, gave the same opinion, as we can read in Rijal al-Najashi, page 348, under the biography of Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Yahya. In a hadith recorded in Rijal al-Kishi, page 315, we read the following. He, meaning the narrator, said, I read in a document with Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam that he informed those who ask about As-Sayyari that he was not in the place he claimed to be and not to give him anything. By the way, Al-Alama Tustari rahimahullah says there's a mistake here since Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam is mentioned when it should actually say Imam al-Askari alayhi salam. But whatever the case may be, this narrator is most certainly an unreliable hadith transmitter and likely a liar, as his status was very low. Now, we must note that the uniqueness of the Shia hadith corpus in comparison to the Jewish, Christian, and Sunni corpus is that our sources were passed down via writings and books rather than being orally transmitted. So when al-Kulayni rahimahullah quotes a narrator, it is likely he's quoting his book and not directly hearing it from the person. Luckily for us, we have this book preserved today, and when we read through the book, we find the same narration, the one about the 17,000 verses, in Sayyari's Kitab al-Qira'at, page number 9. It is the exact chain with the same content, making it certain that the narrator here is Ibn Sayyar and not Ibn Isa, as commonly assumed. Now, if someone asks, how come shaykhs or scholars or many other renowned people like Allama al-Majlisi, rahimahullah, didn't realize this and graded it as sahih? To which we reply, this book was not considered to be a book of usul, meaning a reliable source for early scholars, and was not even read or considered by many of the later scholars. However, we find this book today, and hence it removes any doubt of the narrator. The polemicists from some anti-Shia websites like 12shia.net made silly objections in response to what we said, insisting that the narrator here is actually Ibn Isa. They said,
However, as any student of Shia Hadith will know, when al-Kulayni doesn't include the full name of a narrator, it is because he is referring to the most famous narrator with that name. The existence of as-Sayyari's book has proven to be a double-edged sword. For starters, the existence of this narration in the book of as-Sayyari does prove that as-Sayyari did narrate it. However, it does not prove that Ahmad bin Muhammad in al-Kafi is as-Sayyari as well. It is quite possible that both men narrated the same hadith.
This response is so pathetic, even their own friends acknowledged it. The so-called big fish Farid
Baba Fariduddin, Ganguteli.
himself said in one of his tweets that this argument of the hadith being weak was very convincing. He essentially admits that their or his article's response was not good enough as it could not convince him. For starters, this so-called rule is not necessarily true at all times, as we can find other examples where Sayyari is quoted without being mentioned by name. Here's one example. In al-Kafi, Ali bin Ibrahim al-Qummi narrates from Ahmad bin Muhammad, from Muhammad bin Khalid, who is also known as al-Barqi, from until the end of the chain. He does not mention which Ahmad bin Muhammad is in the chain. However, this same hadith can be found in Kitab al-Qira'at, page 165. This example shows us that Kulayni does not always indicate which Ahmad bin Muhammad is in the chain, making their counter-argument effectively meaningless. As for the possibility of both of them narrating the same hadith, this is an absurd assumption to make for the simple fact it's a baseless claim with no proof. Then they also go on to show examples of other narrations indicating Tahrif, which we can't find in Sayyari's book. However, these are separate issues that are unrelated to this particular hadith. These desperate attempts in trying to weaken the hadith by those examples they used just shows how unobjective our opponents are and unable to admit the falsehood of their argument. Now, when someone reads this hadith, they might come and ask, does this mean al-Kulayni believed in Tahrif? To which we reply, merely narrating a hadith in your book does not indicate that you necessarily believe in it, nor is it sufficient to assume what their interpretation of the hadith would have been. Otherwise, we can go and accuse any Sunni scholar of believing in Tahrif. For example, we can read in Sunan ibn Majah, the verse of stoning and of breastfeeding an adult 10 times was revealed, and the paper was with me under my pillow. When the Messenger of Allah died, we were preoccupied with his death, and a tame sheep came in and ate it. Regardless of what grading Sunnis want to give this report, Ibn Majah reported it. Does that mean he believed in Tahrif? Because the hadith states that a sheep ate a verse which isn't found in the Qur'an anymore. Obviously, no one is stupid enough to accuse Ibn Majah of such a thing just because he narrated it. A second example is the following, found in Tafsir al-Quran al-Azim of Ibn Abi Hatim, where we read that Ibn Abbas is saying the Quran has a scribal error. In the footnote, it says that the chain is authentic, but that does not mean the matn or content of the hadith is acceptable, because it contradicts with everything that the narrators have compiled. So, subhanallah, when we have authentic reports proving Tahrif, Shi'ism is refuted, but when they do, they're allowed to reject it. Wow. Another example from the same book is the following, found in page 210, where we read again that Ibn Abbas is not only saying that a word from the verse of the Quran is wrong, but in the next page he says once again that there's a scribal error in the Quran. And Ibn Abi Hatim said in the beginning of his book that he narrates only with reports that are authentic, which leads us to the question, did Ibn Abi Hatim believe in Tahrif for narrating these reports? Did he believe the Quran is missing verses and has a scribal problem? If you say no, then why the double standards when it comes to al-Kulayni? The fourth example is a famous hadith whose sources can be found here, and we read. Ubay bin Ka'b said to me, how long is Surah Al-Ahzab when you read it? Or how many verses do you think it is? I said to him, 73 verses. He said, that's it? There was a time when it was as long as Surah Al-Baqarah. This was reported by Al-Hakim, Ahmad bin Hanbal, Abdul Razzaq, and others, and they did not give any commentary or understanding of this verse. Does that mean they believe that some verses were lost? If you object with it being abrogated, then so could we. We can also claim that Kulayni believed those verses were abrogated. Are your scholars allowed to do so, but ours aren't? The point I want to make is that you can't simply assume the author's interpretation if he hasn't given it, so claiming he believed in Tahrif because of that is baseless. On another note, some scholars have also considered the possibility of this hadith having an additional made to it that it will change it from 17,000 verses to 7,000, because the word ashara was an addition made in some manuscripts. For example, the editors of this hadith in al-Kafi, volume 4, pages 674 to 675, record the hadith as saying 7,000 instead of 17,000. This is because some manuscripts of al-Kafi aren't identical, so they don't have it, as we can see mainly in the al-Kafi manuscript from Ifad al-Kashani that he recorded in his book al-Wafi. Indeed, they say in the footnote, Muhaqqaq al-Shu'arani said, I say, as for the phrase 17,000 verses in this report, the word ashara has certainly been added by some copyists of our narrators, and 7,000 is an approximation, as is well known in the enumeration of matters for a purpose other than stating the exact number. It is said, the traditions of al-Kafi are 16,000, and the intention is to indicate the abundance and approximation, not to achieve the exact number, for the number of Quranic verses is between 6 and 7,000. For more information, refer to Sharh al-Mazandarani. When we go back to the original source of this hadith in Kitab al-Qira'at, page number 9, we also find that the Muhaqqiq mentions in the footnote that there are some manuscript differences, with some having the variant 7,000 as well, hence putting this narration into question. However, we have to be honest, other manuscript and sources do say 17,000, which makes the possibility of either one still being present. In case our viewers are dissatisfied with dismissing this hadith as being unreliable, and they still regard it as proof for tahrif, we invite them to just think for a moment. If the Qur'an really lost 11,000 verses, surely we would find many people reporting this, no? And yet, we find no historical report nor any corroborating evidence that indicates anything of the sort. Such a significant task would surely have been noted down in history, yet isn't it odd how somehow it got past everything and went completely unnoticed? A huge loss of the Qur'an requires clear intent and cannot be a mere accident. What possible reasoning would the people who tampered with the Qur'an have? Many like to accuse Abu Bakr and Omar of doing such a thing, but no logical or reasonable explanation exists to support that. Was it because they aimed to remove their faults mentioned in the Qur'an? In that case, they would have failed, because we still find these faults mentioned all over the Qur'an, including the incidents of their cowardice in battles, their signs of hypocrisy, and the insults to the Prophet ﷺ made by them. Was it because they aimed to prove, or more likely to remove, the virtues of the Ahlul Bayt ﷺ? In that case, they would have failed even more, because 1/3 of the Qur'an today is still about the Ahlul Bayt. Hundreds of verses in both Shia and Sunni tafsir relate the merits of the Ahlul Bayt ﷺ. So how could this have been their intent? Was it because they aimed to change the laws of the Qur'an for their own politics? Definitely not. For the laws that Sunnis have changed still remain in contradiction with the Qur'an, like the verse of wudu, which proves they did not tamper with the Qur'an for politics. Likewise, the verses about prophetic inheritance of Zakaria and Sulaiman alayhim as-salam still remained intact even when Abu Bakr was in power, yet he did not remove them despite it posing an obvious problem to him usurping Fadak. If these people just wanted power, they would have had no reason to want to change the Qur'an, as they would be hated by the people and be called out for it. This is contrary to what people who want to remain in power would do, for the masses would have criticized them for it and pose a threat to their leadership. The mass transmission of the Qur'an, as memorized by many companions and tabi'een, would make it impossible to be tampered with during the later periods of the caliphates of Uthman or Banu Umayyah, ruling out this possibility entirely. It is inconceivable to think that 11,000 verses could possibly go missing in such a short amount of time without anyone from the thousands of companions and Muslims ever noticing it or reporting about it. One thing to also mention is that the closest alternative number for distortion is a weak report in Tafsir al-Ayyashi that says 300 verses were removed, 300 verses were moved around, and 300 verses were altered. That is less than half of what this hadith says. Based on the hadith, 300 verses are still present, but 600 have been removed and distorted, which is about 1/3 of what this report says. Therefore, it's clear to any reasonable person that this hadith has either been unreliably transmitted or it holds alternative interpretations. Let's talk about these interpretations. Instead of seeing this hadith as clear tahrif and that over 1/3 of the Qur'an has gone missing, many scholars have understood this hadith differently. Some say how with each verse that comes down, Jibreel alayhi salam will teach the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi both the tanzil, meaning the ayah itself, and the ta'wil, meaning the interpretation of the verse. So when it says 17,000 verses, it includes both parts of the ayah, where multiple verses could have multiple ta'wils. Another point to consider is that the hadith mentions how the Qur'an was initially revealed. This means it includes all abrogated verses and separately revealed verses, such as Ayat al-Tathir, which had two parts revealed separately. Or like verse 4 of Surah 65, in which Abu Zakaria al-Farra reports it to be revealed in multiple parts, as we can read in Ma'ani al-Quran, volume 3, page 163. Mu'adh bin Jabal asked the Prophet, "We know the waiting period of menstruating women, but what is the waiting period for older women who have ceased menstruation?" So the verse was revealed, and those who no longer expect menstruation among your women, if you doubt, then their period is 3 months. Then a man stood up and asked, "O Messenger of Allah, what about the waiting period for young girls who have not yet menstruated?" The Prophet replied, "Their waiting period is the same as that of older women who have ceased menstruation, 3 months. Then another man asked, "What about pregnant women?" So the verse was revealed, and for those who are pregnant, their term is until they give birth. When a pregnant woman gives birth, her waiting period ends, and if her husband is deceased, he is not to be buried while she is pregnant. In this well-known narration in books of tafsir, it is mentioned that this verse of Surah 65 was revealed in different consecutive parts after people asked questions. As you can see, the verse did not come in full form at once, but only after people asked their questions. That's when it formed into one complete verse. Other surahs or verses have also been revealed multiple times. Fakhruddin al-Razi, for example, stated in Surah al-Fatiha that it descended in Mecca and in Medina. We read in Tafsir al-Kabir, volume 1, page 184. The third opinion, some scholars said, this surah was revealed once in Mecca and once in Medina. So it is both Meccan and Medinian. For this reason, Allah named it al-Muthani, meaning the repeated, because He repeated its revelation. However, this was only an exaggeration in honoring it. Thus, all these factors combined can reach a total of 17,000 verses. But lastly, I personally believe that the strongest alternative interpretation of this hadith is the one of Shaykh Saduq, rahimahullah, as we can read in his I'tiqadat al-Imamiyya, page 252, where he says, "On the contrary, we say that so much of revelation has come down, which is not part of the Qur'an, that were it to be collected, its extent would undoubtedly be 17,000 verses. The intended meaning of this hadith is that the total amount of revelation that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam received includes revelations such as hadith Qudsi, divine inspirations, knowledge given through dreams, and so on. And all of this would amount to 17,000 verses in total." In conclusion, this hadith remains insufficient as evidence to negate the preservation of the Holy Quran, and is in fact logically impossible to be true. If we were to assume this hadith was true in the way it was transmitted, meaning if it was sahih, then alternative interpretations may suffice in explaining it. But aside from that, the most likely possibility in regards to this hadith is that it simply isn't true. the fault most likely lies in the way it was transmitted. Either Sayyari fabricated it, as he is the source of many pro-Tahrif reports, and Ghalis were famously known to advocate for Tahrif, or he intentionally or unintentionally wrote it down incorrectly, whether due to summarizing a longer report or due to other reasons that honestly do not need to be investigated. And with this, we end the video. I would like to thank Sayyid Al-Kadhimi for this amazing work. May Allah bless him and bless all of us. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.